The Danfo horns had a language of their own, a staccato Lagos heartbeat that rose and fell with the morning tides of people. From her Uber window, Cecily Aman watched the city unspool, bridges like silver ribs over water, the glitter of Victoria Island towers beyond palms, street vendors balancing pyramids of gala, and chilled La Casera under a sky already hot with intent. She told herself she'd come home to be small again. After Abuja, after the man she had nearly given up everything for proved that sweet words could be a velvet cover for empty space. After the nights she counted her own breaths just to prove she still had them. Lagos felt like a place to be ordinary, anonymous in a crowd. She could design small things again, rooms, lobbies, spaces that listened when you spoke. She could be quiet. Her mother had said, "Come and rest, Nwanam. Eat my okra soup and sleep inside your father's old AC room." Lagos will not bite. Lagos will bless. Blessing was a big word. Cecily didn't dare reach for it, but as the car cut off Ozumba Mbadiwe toward Akin Adesola, she let herself look up. The lagoon winked in the distance. The wind flipped a curl against her cheek. She tucked it behind her ear and smiled despite herself. Lagos had a way of daring you to hope, even when you swore you wouldn't. Mongaro Real Estate. The building was impossible to miss. 30 floors of glass and pride, wrapped in marble like a promise. The security at the entry swept their wands, greeted her with professional warmth, and handed her a visitor tag. The lobby smelled of lemongrass and money. The ceiling rose high enough to swallow every doubt. Cecily's sandals were quiet on the polished floor as she crossed to the lift. She checked her reflection in the chrome. Simple cream blouse, high-waist black trousers, hair in a neat puff, a small gold chain at her throat. She looked like what she wanted to be, competent, composed, fine. The lift opened on level 21 to an office flooded with morning light. Floor-to-ceiling windows cupped a view of the lagoon and the scatter of boats pulling white wakes behind them. Desks formed serene islands. People looked purposeful without hurry. A sign read, "Design Development." "Hi, you must be Cecily," a woman said, appearing with a smile and a stack of forms. "I'm Bola HR, said to bring you straight in." "Your portfolio was... wow." Cecily thanked her, breath hitching around that small kindness. She followed Bola down a corridor lined with framed photographs, hotels that wore their luxury like understatement. A pair of glass doors whispered open to a meeting lounge dressed in soft gray and green. And there he was. Alvin Mongaro stood with his back to her, his jacket slung over a chair, sleeves rolled to the forearms like he'd just argued with a stubborn contract and won. Broad shoulders, a clean fade, the kind of stillness that made a room behave. He turned when he felt them enter, a slow pivot that caught sunlight along the line of a jaw too disciplined to be called beautiful. His eyes were green. They had been green that night too, the shade of tide water at dusk when the world was hushed and choices felt like air. The night a month ago in a private lounge off Amadou Bello Way, after too many toasts at a client's product launch. The night they said, "Just this once," and meant it. The night she left before sunrise with a taste of honesty on her tongue and no number exchanged because life was easier when you could pretend it hadn't trembled. Her heart did that old foolish thing, 2 quick knocks against her ribs like a guest begging to be let in. "Miss Aman," Alvin said, and his voice was the same as she remembered, even, low, careful. "Welcome to Mongaro." She gripped the strap of her tote. "Mr. Mongaro." Bola glanced between them, something curious bright in her eyes, then placed the forms on a table. I'll let you two. I'll be at my desk if you need anything." The doors side closed and quiet gathered. "For what it's worth," Alvin said, his gaze steady on hers, "I didn't know HR had assigned you to me until this morning." Cecily's fingers tightened on the tote strap. "Then we're both surprised." He gave the faintest ghost of a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "This floor moves fast. My assistant left last month, and your resume says you can handle more than calendars and coffee runs. That's good, because I need someone who can think ahead of me, not just follow behind." The words were all business, but beneath them lay an undercurrent, an unspoken acknowledgement of the night they'd shared. Cecily nodded, forcing her voice to be calm. I can handle whatever the job requires. He studied her for a beat longer, as though weighing both her professional capacity and the memory of her skin beneath his hands. Then he gestured toward the desk near the window. That's yours. Let's get to work. Her first hours passed in a blur of emails, meeting requests, and brief instructions delivered in Alvin's measured, deliberate voice. He didn't linger to chat. He moved from conference call to site visit with a focus that dared anyone to slow him down. Yet every so often, Cecily felt his gaze flick toward her. A fleeting glance she wasn't sure was real until it left her cheeks warm. By lunch, she'd already rearranged his calendar to accommodate an urgent investor briefing and drafted 2 follow-up proposals based on morning calls. She was exhausted, but the kind of exhausted that came from keeping pace with a mind that never stumbled. Late in the afternoon, she stood by the window, scanning the lagoon's changing colors. The city below was beginning to hum with the restlessness of closing time, vendors shouting final prices, Danfo buses leaning into lanes, the light on the water dimming to molten gold. You work quietly. Alvin's voice came from behind her. She turned. Is that a good thing? For me, yes, he said, walking closer. But it makes me wonder what's happening in your head. Cecily swallowed. Just trying to do the job well. His eyes lingered on her, green and unreadable. And nothing else? For a moment, the air between them shifted, carrying the echo of night in the lounge, the taste of whiskey and truth, the way his hand had cupped her jaw like she was something worth holding on to. She straightened. It's best we keep things professional, Mr. Mongaro. Something flickered in his expression, amusement, maybe challenge. We'll see, Miss Aman. When she left the building that evening, the heat had eased into a warm breeze. Lagos shimmered in the dusk, its skyline edged in amber. Cecily inhaled deeply, telling herself she could manage this. Work with him, forget that night, keep her life simple. But deep down, she already knew simplicity had walked out the door the moment Alvin Mongaro turned around and met her eyes. The next morning, Cecily arrived 15 minutes early. The air was cooler than usual for Lagos. Clouds hung low, softening the sunlight, but the humidity still clung to her skin like a second layer. She took the lift up to the 21st floor, inhaling the faint lemongrass scent that had already become familiar. Alvin was already there. He stood by the glass wall, phone to his ear, voice low but firm. His charcoal gray suit was perfectly cut, the green silk tie catching a glint of morning light. Even in the middle of a conversation, he noticed her. His eyes flickered in acknowledgement before he turned back to the call. Cecily slipped behind her desk, powering on her laptop and setting her notepad out. She could feel him in her periphery, like standing too close to an open flame. When he finally ended the call, he walked toward her desk. Good morning, Miss Aman. Good morning, sir, she replied, her tone as professional as she could manage. Alvin, he corrected without hesitation. She looked up surprised. We're at work. And outside of work? He asked, leaning on the edge of her desk. Cecily arched a brow. We've only been outside of work once, and I'd rather not repeat it. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, not quite a frown. Noted, but while we're here, we have a lot to do. You're accompanying me to the Victoria Island site visit this afternoon. Bring your portfolio. I want the client to see your ideas. Her pen froze mid-note. You're sure? I've only just started. I'm sure, he said, his voice carrying that quiet authority that made disagreement almost impossible. If you're going to work for me, you need to be in the room where things happen. By mid-afternoon, they were weaving through Lagos traffic in his black Range Rover. The AC hummed, and soft jazz played in the background. Cecily kept her gaze on the passing streets, Ahose Adeogun's high-rises giving way to the breezy openness near the ocean. Are you always this quiet? He asked, glancing at her briefly. I'm here to work, Alvin, not chat. And yet, he said, a faint smile tugging at his mouth, I remember you chatting just fine a month ago. In fact, you laughed so hard you... Don't, she cut in quickly, heat rising to her cheeks. He chuckled, the sound deep and unguarded. All right, I'll behave. The project site was an unfinished luxury hotel overlooking the Atlantic. The salty wind carried the scent of wet concrete and ocean spray. Inside, the skeletal structure echoed with the clatter of tools and workers shouting instructions. Alvin introduced her to the investors, a mix of Nigerian and international stakeholders. This is Cecily Aman, our new design assistant. She has a sharp eye for detail. Her pulse quickened at the confidence in his voice. When the investors asked for her input on the lobby design, she unfolded her sketches. She spoke about open space, natural light, and textures that whispered luxury rather than shouted it. Alvin listened silently, but she could feel his gaze. Steady, focused, approving. When they returned to the car, he didn't start the engine immediately. Instead, he turned to her. You were impressive in there. She met his eyes. Thank you. You're good at making people listen, he said softly, including me. Cecily shifted in her seat, breaking the stare. We should get back before traffic gets worse. But the truth was, his words lingered long after they merged back into the chaos of Lagos roads. That night, she sat in her apartment on Lagos Island, sipping tea and replaying the day. She told herself Alvin's praise was just professional courtesy, but the memory of his voice, low, deliberate, edged with something warmer, kept her awake far longer than she wanted. And somewhere deep in her chest, a quiet warning began to drum. You're standing too close to the fire again. By the third week, Cecily had learned Alvin Mongaro's rhythms, his morning preference for black coffee with 1 sugar, the way he preferred meetings stacked back-to-back in the mornings so his afternoons could be devoted to site visits, and his habit of staring out the window when deep in thought, one hand resting on his chin. She had also learned that boundaries with him were like Lagos traffic laws, acknowledged in theory, ignored in practice. That Friday started with rain. The streets glistened, the city wrapped in a silver mist that blurred headlights and softened the usual rush. In the office, the view over the lagoon looked like a watercolor painting. Cecily had just settled at her desk when Alvin emerged from his office, jacket off, sleeves rolled. Cancel my 2 o'clock, he said. We'll be at the Eco-Atlantic site instead. Noted, she replied, jotting it down. He paused. You'll join me. She hesitated. It's just a concrete frame right now. What would you need me for? I need your eyes, he said simply. Then after a beat, and your company. The last words were softer, almost swallowed by the rain. Cecily pretended she hadn't heard them, but her heart picked up its pace. The rain eased by the time they reached the oceanfront site. Workers in reflective vests moved like bright dots against the pale skeleton of the rising building. The air was thick with salt and damp concrete. As they walked through the half-built lobby, Alvin slowed beside her. This space, he said, gesturing to the massive glass panels yet to be installed, needs to make people feel like Lagos is both theirs and beyond them. She smiled faintly. That's poetic for a man who negotiates land permits all day. He glanced at her. I wasn't always a numbers man. Something in his tone invited questions. What were you before? Someone who built things with his hands, he said. My father started this company with bricks and a stubborn will. I studied architecture before business took over. Sometimes I miss it. It was the first personal thing he had shared with her. As they walked deeper into the site, he pointed out details. A curve in the mezzanine, the alignment of marble columns, like a man talking about someone he loved. Cecily listened, her own excitement growing, her sketches unfolding in her mind. When they paused in what would be the rooftop restaurant, the ocean stretched before them, steel blue and infinite. The wind tugged at her blouse, lifting her curls. You look like you belong here, Alvin said quietly. She turned to him. And you look like you're trying to say something you shouldn't. He didn't step back. Maybe I am. Their eyes held, green meeting warm brown, and in that suspended moment, the noise of the site faded to a distant hum. His hand brushed her elbow, feather light but enough to send a current through her. "This is dangerous," she whispered. "I know," he murmured, "but tell me you don't feel it too." Cecily swallowed hard. "I didn't come here for this." "And yet," he said, his voice deepening, "you're here." That night, long after they'd returned to the office, she stayed behind to finish drafting a client presentation. The building was quiet, the only sound the soft whir of the AC and the faint rumble of rain returning outside. When Alvin reappeared in the doorway, she didn't look up immediately. "You should go home," she said, her voice steady. "I will," he said, "after you." She finally met his gaze. He leaned against the door frame, hands in his pockets, a mix of weariness and something unspoken in his eyes. "Cecily," he said softly, "I'm not asking for anything you don't want to give, but I can't keep pretending I don't think about you when you're not in the room." Her chest tightened. "Then maybe you shouldn't say things like that." "Maybe," he agreed, but neither of them moved. And for the first time since she'd met him, Cecily wasn't sure if she wanted him to. The Monday after the Echo Atlantic visit, Mongaro Real Estate buzzed with the usual controlled chaos, phones ringing, executives in sharp suits weaving between meetings, the hum of deals in motion. Cecily had barely stepped into the lobby when she felt it, the shift in the air, the kind that comes before a storm. Standing near the front desk, dressed in an emerald sheath that clung like malice, was Amira Oladipo, Alvin's ex. Cecily recognized her instantly. Lagos Society pages had documented her every gala entrance. Her beauty was undeniable, but her smile now was razor thin. "Cecily Aman, right?" Amira's voice was honey over glass. "I've heard so much about you." Cecily kept her tone polite. "Good morning. Can I help you?" "Oh, I'm sure you can," Amira purred. "Tell me, does Alvin make all his assistants feel special, or just the ones he decides to warm his bed with?" The words landed like a slap, but Cecily's years of professional composure held. "If you have business with Mr. Mongaro, I'll let his office know you're here." Before Amira could respond, Alvin appeared from the lift, jaw tight. "Amira, leave, now!" She turned, feigning innocence. "I just came to meet your new assistant. You've met her. Now go." His voice was low, but steel threaded every word. Amira's eyes glittered. "Careful, Alvin. You forget how much I know." He stepped closer, enough that Cecily caught the controlled anger in his posture. "And you forget I don't scare easily. Don't come near her again." For a moment, Amira looked genuinely startled, but she recovered with a smirk. "We'll see." With a final glance at Cecily, she swept out of the building. Cecily turned to head upstairs, her pulse still racing, only to almost collide with another man stepping through the revolving doors. He was tall, clean-shaven, wearing a navy suit that fit too perfectly to be accidental. "Cecily?" His tone was part surprise, part delight. "It's been a while." Her stomach dropped. Nate Barlow, the blue-eyed British Nigerian she'd had a one-night encounter with months before Alvin. She'd never expected to see him again. "I'm here for a meeting with Mongaro," Nate said, his smile warm. "But fate has a funny way of reminding us of unfinished business." Before she could respond, Alvin returned from the security desk and stopped short at the sight of them. "We're due upstairs, Cecily," he said, the possessiveness in his tone clear. Nate extended a hand to Alvin. "Nate Barlow. I believe we have a mutual interest, in business, of course." Alvin shook it briefly, then placed a hand at the small of Cecily's back. "Let's go," he said, guiding her toward the lift. Inside, the doors closed, sealing them in quiet. Alvin didn't speak at first. His jaw was set, eyes fixed ahead. "You don't have to," she began. "Yes, I do," he cut in, turning to face her. "I don't care who they are, Cecily. Amira can dig up every ghost she wants, and this Nate can think whatever he likes. None of it changes what's between us." Her throat tightened. "You're so sure about something we haven't even named." "I don't need a name for it," he said softly. "I just know I'm not letting anyone take it from me." For a moment, all she could do was hold his gaze. And in that moment, despite the chaos swirling outside their small space, she believed him. The whispers started on a Thursday morning. By lunchtime, they had grown into full-blown murmurs that seemed to follow Cecily down the hallways of Mongaro real estate. People paused mid-conversation when she walked past. Some avoided eye contact altogether. It wasn't until Bola quietly slipped a folded tabloid onto Cecily's desk that she understood why. There in glossy print was a photograph of her and Alvin on the rooftop of the Echo Atlantic site. She was laughing, wind in her hair, Alvin leaning in close, one hand on the railing just behind her. The headline screamed, "Billionaire Mongaro's new muse, inside the rumored romance with his assistant." Her stomach twisted. She could already imagine Amira's satisfied smile somewhere in the city. Before she could compose herself, Alvin appeared at her desk. "My office, now." The blinds were half closed, muting the sharp Lagos sunlight. Alvin stood behind his desk, the tabloid already in his hand. "This came from Amira," he said flatly. "She has contacts in the media." Cecily crossed her arms. "So she wins. She wanted to humiliate me, and she has." "No," Alvin said, his voice low but firm. "She's not going to win anything." Her voice wavered despite her efforts. "Do you know what this makes me look like? To everyone here? To the clients?" Alvin stepped around the desk, closing the distance between them. "It makes you look like a woman I care about. And if they have a problem with that, they can come to me." "This is my career," she said, her chest tightening. "I don't want to be another one of your headlines." He studied her for a long moment, green eyes steady. "Then let's tell the truth, because I'm done pretending you're just my assistant." Later that day, an impromptu staff meeting was called in the main conference room. The tension was thick as Alvin entered with Cecily just behind him. He didn't sit at the head of the table. He stood. "I'm aware of the rumors going around," he began, his voice carrying to every corner. "Yes, Cecily Aman and I have a personal relationship. No, it has nothing to do with her position here. She was hired because she's exceptional at what she does, and anyone who thinks otherwise can speak to me directly." The room was silent. Cecily's heart pounded, not from fear, but from the fierce clarity in his defense of her. When the meeting broke, people returned to their work. The energy changed. The whispers had no more room to grow. That evening, they stood in the quiet of Alvin's office, the city's nightlights glittering beyond the glass. "You didn't have to do that," Cecily said softly. "Yes, I did," he replied, stepping closer. "I told you I wasn't letting anyone take this from me." She searched his face, looking for doubt, for hesitation. She found none. And in that moment, the wall she'd been holding between them crumbled. "I don't want to hide anymore either," she whispered. He closed the last inch between them, his forehead resting against hers. "Then we won't." Outside, Lagos moved in its usual restless rhythm, but inside that office, time felt still. What had been complicated and unspoken now stood in the open, real, unshakable, and theirs. The weekend brought no peace. Amira's calls and veiled threats filtered through mutual contacts while Nate's persistence escalated, sending flowers to Cecily's office, leaving notes with reception, just to talk. Alvin had had enough. On Monday morning, he strode into the lobby where Nate stood, leaning casually against the marble reception counter. The tension in the air was almost visible. "Nate," Alvin said, his voice low but laced with steel, "this ends today." Nate's smile was easy, but his eyes were sharp. "You can't claim ownership over her, Mongaro. She's her own person." "You're right," Alvin replied, stepping closer. "She's free to choose, but she's already made her choice, and it isn't you. Respect it, or I will make sure every door in this city stays closed to you." The words landed with the finality of a gavel strike. Nate's expression hardened, but he didn't reply. He simply gathered his things and walked out, the automatic doors hissing shut behind him. Amira was less subtle. She cornered Alvin at a high society charity gala 2 nights later, her diamond earrings catching the light like tiny weapons. "Threatening Nate won't keep me quiet," she said, sipping champagne. Alvin's gaze was cool. I don't care if you're quiet. I care that you understand this. You no longer have a say in my life. Or hers. And if I decide to make things messy, he leaned in slightly, his tone deadly calm, then I'll make it my mission to ensure every boardroom in this city remembers you as the woman who tried and failed to destroy Mongaro real estate for personal revenge. Amira's smirk faltered for the first time. Without another word, she turned on her heel and disappeared into the glittering crowd. Later that night, back at Alvin's penthouse overlooking the city, Cecily sat curled on the sofa, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea she hadn't touched. Alvin watched her from across the room, sensing the heaviness in her silence. "You've been quiet all evening," he said gently. She looked up, eyes uncertain. "I saw what you did, for me, with Nate, with Amira. You keep fighting for us, and I—" Her voice faltered. "And you what?" he prompted softly. "I'm scared, Alvin." She set the cup down and clasped her hands together. "I've loved before. I gave everything I had to someone who made me believe I was enough, only to watch him walk away without looking back. I promised myself I'd never let anyone close enough to hurt me like that again." Alvin crossed the room and sat beside her, close but not touching. "And now?" She swallowed. "Now you're here, and it terrifies me because I can feel myself falling. And if this ends badly—" He reached for her hand, his fingers warm and steady around hers. "Cecily, I can't promise I'll never make mistakes. But I can promise I won't run. Not when things get hard. Not when people try to tear us apart. I'll fight for you every single time." Her eyes shimmered, and for the first time, she let herself lean into him, her head against his shoulder, his arm wrapping around her like it was where she was always meant to be. And somewhere between the city lights outside and the steady beat of his heart under her ear, Cecily realized she was already halfway to letting go of her fear. 6 months. Lagos gleamed under a honey-gold evening sky. The city was alive in the way only Lagos could be. Horns calling out in sharp rhythm, street vendors shouting over each other, high-rises catching the last light like silver blades. From the rooftop terrace of the newly completed Echo Atlantic, Grand Cecily stood at the edge, looking out over the Atlantic. The ocean stretched into forever, the waves curling and breaking with a steady pulse. The wind lifted her hair, carrying the faint scent of salt and possibility. "Looks like you've claimed the whole city." Alvin's voice came from behind her, warm and amused. She turned to find him, walking toward her, wearing an open-collared shirt and that quiet confidence she had learned to read like a language. In his hand was a single champagne flute. "It's yours too, you know," she said with a smile. "Your vision." He shook his head as he joined her at the railing. "Our hotel. You breathe life into these walls. Every detail whispers your name." She laughed softly. "I thought you didn't do poetry." "I don't," he said, brushing a curl away from her cheek, "except when it's about you." Inside, the grand opening was in full swing. Lagos's business elite, international investors, and a swirl of media filled the gleaming lobby she had designed. Marble floors that mirrored the light, gold accents that caught every camera flash, and an open space that felt like the ocean had been invited in. Bola had already cornered 2 reporters, bragging about our Cecily and her role in making the project what it was. Cecily caught Alvin watching her across the room more than once, his eyes warm, proud, and unmistakably hers. When she slipped back to the terrace later for air, he followed, as he always did. He took both her hands in his. "Cecily Aman," he said, his voice low enough that it was just for her. "I've spent my whole life building things that last, skyscrapers, hotels, empires. But nothing has mattered like building this with you." Her chest tightened, but this time not from fear. "You know I still get scared," she admitted softly, "but I also know I don't want to imagine this city, or my life, without you in it." He smiled, the kind that reached his eyes. "Then don't." Without ceremony, without any of the grand gestures the society pages would expect, He kissed her. Slow, certain, with the kind of quiet conviction that made every rooftop light blur into gold. When they finally pulled back, the city hummed below, the ocean whispered beyond, and the hotel pulsed with the life they had created together. For the first time, Cecily didn't feel like she was standing too close to the fire. She felt like she was home. And in Alvin's steady gaze, she saw the truth they'd fought for. Whatever storms came, whatever ghosts tried to return, they would meet them, side by side, here in their Legos.